Hey class, thanks for tuning in to my presentation. And in particular, what I want to focus on today is the cost of housing in and around Salem, Oregon. I want to propose an initiative called the Affordable Density Initiative to help reduce houselessness and the difficulty people have with getting homes. What I'm calling for is actual real structural change at the governmental and procedural levels. Because drawing on Rank's work on structural vulnerability and the Alice framework for working poor households, I want to argue that Salem doesn't simply have, individuals with budgeting problems or a lazy group of lower people, but that we actually have a structural housing problem that needs to be addressed. So to that end, I want to try and systemically address that problem. We often hear that people just need to work harder to afford a home or get a better job. But as Rank argues, poverty is like a game of musical chairs. If there are 10 players and only 8 chairs, 2 people must lose, no matter how fast or skilled they are. And when it comes to housing, using this analogy, in Salem, we simply don't have enough chairs, which drives the prices of housing up and leaves the poorest, the most vulnerable among us, in with an inability to actually get in a chair. So my proposal, or one of the ways we can help with this, is creating those chairs not by sprawling outward and building homes and continuing to expand, but rather by unlocking the hidden capacity within our existing neighborhoods. My core proposal is that the city should release remaining zoning restrictions to allow multi-tenant dwellings or MDUs, multi-dwelling units, and adapt in our existing neighborhoods for adaptive reuse and to create space for people to move into areas that are already populated and homes are already at. Before we get into what we're going to do, I want to explain why I think we need to do it. And I want to start with Mark Rank's idea of structural vulnerability. I mentioned the musical chairs analogy in the last slide, but see, the thing is, people are walking around in that analogy doing everything right. They've got jobs, they're trying to save, they're trying to be responsible. But when the music stops, someone is left standing, not because they failed morally or didn't work hard enough or didn't try, but simply because there's not enough chairs. And the thing is, housing in Salem looks like that game. We have more families needing stable, affordable homes than we have units that match their incomes. And the thing is, when the music stops in that analogy, the ones who have the higher income automatically get the chairs. So that means that there are people who are working and trying that will not get housing no matter what they do. And so, with that lens in front of us, we need to figure out ways to equitably and affordably add more chairs to the program. Now, there is a huge gap between the income and cost of rent and housing in Salem between what people are actually earning. 14 of the top 20 fastest growing occupations in Oregon do not pay enough to afford even a one-bedroom apartment, according to Alice statistics. There is also an incredible disproportionate impact on BIPOC communities, where home ownership rates for the BIPOC are 49% versus 66% for white Oregonians. And the single household parents are even more at disadvantage, with 74% of single female headed families below the Alice threshold and not able to afford a home. It is there is a huge disparity between how much it costs to actually get into a house and how much people actually earn. With that discrepancy in mind, let's look at the math for a sec. In Salem, the median home sells for $452,000, which at a 7% interest, if you don't count insurance and taxes, works out to about $3,000 a month. Now, for Alice people, asset limited, income constrained, employed individuals, 42% of Oregon households earn below the basic cost of living. 42%, it's almost half. For single adults, that amount is $33,468 a year, or for two adults, an infant, and a preschooler, that amount is $88,500, give or take. The city of Salem's own housing needs it has identified that there's a 207-acre deficit specifically for multifamily land. So it literally means we don't have the zone dirt for anything other than single family homes. But with those costs so incredibly high, it's not possible for our lower income people to actually afford a home, even when full-time employed in what should be gainful employment. Now, I'm hardly the first person to notice this, and in fact, the state of Oregon is doing work to try and combat that. House Bill 2001 recently passed, which allows for middle housing, right? Which is allowing duplexes and triplexes to be built where normally single family homes would be. The problem is, and while that's very helpful, it's still prohibitively expensive and slow. So we're just not seeing the amount of houses develop. And add to that there just is this sort of mentality a lot of times that people who need to buy a home just need to get a job. Well, the fact is, David Wagner writes in No Longer Homeless that simply telling people that is a myth. Many of our unhoused neighbors and others do work, but the gap is impossible for them to reach because of wage stagnations and other issues. It's mathematically impossible without subsidies or drastically cheaper housing for us to house everybody who needs a place. So this gets to the rub of my proposal in that we begin allowing affordable density via adaptive reuse. And what I mean by that is we begin to allow existing structures to be modified to accommodate multiple families or add ADUs to existing property. Now, first, the way that would look is you would allow zoning areas to become mixed use zones. And as long as projects meet basic safety and design standards, there wouldn't be any hearings or special delays or, exorbitant costs for it. In addition, we would make that, by right permitting also cheaper by waiving or reducing system development charges where owners create, so owners can create truly affordable units from existing structures in a cheaper, faster way. It would lower the cost significantly of doing that. Now, in addition to that, Salem could also actually be proactive in helping that by offering pre-approved architectural plans for common conversions or providing technical assistance to make it easier for regular homeowners to join in. It would increase the income of the homeowners and their property value while also providing significantly cheaper to develop housing. Um, in addition, we could also start offering small grants or low interest loans to low income homeowners who want to create a rental unit in their home. So it would be a win-win for everybody involved. Now, this development would stand in contrast to what we mostly have in Salem. Now, this picture I took today from my house up in Eastern Washington, but I think it's very similar. I mean, this is a neighborhood filled of single family homes with a decent sized lots. You could very easily have used this land much more efficiently, and you could in Salem. In fact, when I was in Greece, I was noticing some of their use of land, and look at the difference in the population density here. The number of people that they fit into spaces is incredible. Now, we often fear that that kind of density will bring disorder, but actually the data from Greece suggests it creates a safety net and actually is a net benefit. Um, Greece has faced severe economic difficulties lately, and particularly with the new immigration and all of that. But yet, they have a reported homelessness rate of roughly 13 per 100,000 people, compared to over 75 per 100,000 in the US. That's over a 6-to-1 difference. And see, the key factor in this is their urban structure. And particularly, they have this mentality, they call it Tokaya, which is ubiquitous multi-story apartment buildings or houses that house mixed income families together. There's literally a structure where neighborhoods aren't divided by income, but they all live together in same multi-dwelling units. Now, see, that density doesn't just house people, it actually facilitates strong social networks where families and neighbors can support each other during crises. But by that unity and that connection, it actually has a higher positive social impact, which means that Greece has reduced its poverty by 61% versus social transfer versus the US. So in that sense, Wagner's work on staying housed and helping people stay housed reinforce this. She finds that people remain housed when they have both affordable rent and a network of community supports. And in practice, it's easier to build when people live near each other and near services, not when they're isolated in car-dependent sprawl like my neighborhood here. By allowing multi-tenant dwelling, by allowing ADUs and MDUs to be built, we aren't just building units, we're also building the proximity necessary for community care. And we all know how much more our world needs that. So what is the time frame for wanting to do this if we move forward tomorrow? I mean, House Bill 2001's been working for a little bit, but it's been slow to develop. See, the great thing about this is you're just tweaking existing structures and plans. And so it could be significantly faster. The first year or two, you'd have code updates, public engagement, pilot designs, and exploration of that. In years 3 to 5, you would actually start having, those home share grants or those MDU assistance tax breaks roll out, which by year 5 and on, you could be beginning to evaluate unit production and Alice impact. Now, the total cost of this, including grants, because you're not actively building new property or buying land, is the funding would be about 150 million. And that's of course an estimate, but we would hope we could get some of those funds both from the private industry as well as the public. Because people are going to want to pour money into their own structures to make more money. Plus, we could do grants and relatively cheaply begin to make a big difference. Um, there is, of course, also other sources that we could build off of to help generate money and maybe even rebalance some of our shelter dollars towards permanent units in order to accommodate people. But here's the catch. If this is going to be a community initiative, we need community buy-in. I mean, you can't just pass a zoning ordinance and all of a sudden everything works. So who do we need to get to buy-in? Who do we need at the table? Well, on the government side, we definitely need the city of Salem, as well as Department of Land Conservation and Development, because they're going to need to approve and, change codes. Again, additionally, the Salem Housing Authority would need to be a key partner because they could offer vouchers or help target low-income tenants to get things moving quicker. Um, Nonprofits like Arches or the United Way or Habitat for Humanity would bring direct service experience to these remodels and these changes, along with existing relationships already with Alice families, and potentially provide labor and even volunteer power for renovations and the work. In addition, we're going to need homeowners, renters, and people with direct experience of housing instability at the table from the beginning. Neighborhood associations and faith communities can either be major opponents or powerful allies. So engaging them early can help reframe density from overcrowding to making room for people who already serve our community, such as teachers and laborers and construction workers. That 14 out of 20 who are struggling buying a home but are contributing members to our society and would contribute well to our community members and partnerships. Get those people on board, however, we are going to need to tweak the narrative on a few things. I mean, there are going to be common concerns, and one of them might be, well, if you increase the density, it hurts your property values and that makes the neighborhoods unsafe and everything deteriorates. But actually, if you look at the statistics and the information, affordable housing does not automatically lower values, and it actually, in many cases, actually raises it because the kind of people that we would be bringing in would be people who want to buy a home or have housing and have stable families, but just haven't been able to afford it, like teachers or nurses or service workers that would help build and strengthen our communities. Another concern is parking and traffic, and here the answer would be to be strategic. We could expand bus lines or develop neighborhoods that had mass transit nearby, which would be a win for all of us. Or we could also just relax parking requirements and so on and so forth. So there wasn't the overwhelm of all of that. And finally, people who would worry about how the neighborhood would look or its character, well, this is where the invisible density in the MDUs would be beneficial because you're not building new structures necessarily. You're just tweaking existing ones. You're taking a regular house and splitting it into multiple units. So from the street, the neighborhood looks relatively the same, but you're multiplying your housing availability significantly. So, class, coming full circle and to close the loop on this with our social work values and our course material, Rank urges us to focus on structural vulnerability and systems. This proposal is exactly that. It tries to change the rule of the game so there are more chairs, and the chairs are placed where people can reach them. I mean, using the Alice framework helps keep us honest about who we're talking about. This is not an abstract poor population. It's an asset limited, income constrained, employed household, many of whom are actively serving our community but are struggling for basic costs of living. In addition, Wagner's work on community support and staying housed pushes me to say that we're not only building units, right? If we can see anything from this model in Greece, we're trying to shape neighborhoods where people can access support and build a deeper community and sense of belonging, in addition to having a sense of ownership and housing. Thoughtful density makes that more possible and more efficient. So, from a social work perspective, this is about upholding human dignity, promoting social and economic justice, and moving beyond individual level interventions to address the systems that harm the people around us, our community, our clients, and our neighbors. So, to wrap it all up, what I'm proposing is to treat affordable housing as an essential infrastructure and benefit by changing our zoning laws and adapting reuse reforms for MDUs. If we center Alice households and lived experience in our design, we can work together to create affordable housing to help end or lower the incidence of houselessness and to move forward into a better community. So with that, we need to move forward with data collection, coalition building, and policy advocacy and start looking at some of these pieces. But I propose we start moving on this as soon as possible. This change can happen. Our communities need it. Our most vulnerable need it. And we will all benefit. Thank you.